Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. So welcome to today's webinar, which is on journaling for mental health challenges and issues. My name is Rafael Mansour. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as the founder of a startup called Therapy Journal. And I'll talk briefly about that in a bit, but this webinar is being hosted on behalf of Therapy Journal. And so I'll give a little introduction about me and my background, and then we'll jump into what we're going to cover today. So who am I? Again, my name is Rafael Mansour. I'm a therapist working in a private practice in Northern Virginia. It's a small group called Wellness Through Counseling, and I work with a variety of clients across a number of different issues. My training is in marriage and family therapy, but the bulk of my caseload is usually individuals. In addition to being a therapist, I also work part-time for an organization called the Together Program. And this is an organization that offers free 6-week couples workshops for couples that are dealing with financial stress. And it's completely free. It's sponsored by the Department of Health and Human Services. And you can learn more about that at the www.togetherprogram.org. Unfortunately, it is only for DC area couples, or at least one person has to be in Maryland, DC, or Virginia. I'm also recently now the former chair of the Couples Interest Network for AAMFT, where we've offered a number of different resources for clinicians that are specialized in couples therapy. And lastly, I'm the founder and CEO of Therapy Journal. And so just talk a little bit about that briefly. So Therapy Journal is a therapy companion app that we're building to try to enhance the experience of therapy for both clients and therapists alike. And so for clients, what Therapy Journal allows you to do is to document your therapy lessons. So a lot of times you might have a really good therapy session, and then afterwards you're kind of wondering, well, what did we actually cover? And so it can be nice to actually journal that down and track some notes. As well as in between sessions, a lot of things can happen that that you might want to bring up in therapy, but by the time your session actually comes around, you might forget what that was. And so it's just a nice place to organize your therapy journey. In addition, we make it so you're able to share your entries with your therapist. So if there's something that you want them to see and read beforehand, you can just share it with them right through the app. And we also offer a library of journaling templates, which are designed to address different types of issues. And a lot of this has come from my experience with my clients and lessons that I've learned over the years. And so it's been a process of kind of distilling that down and trying to put it into a format where you can actually journal about it to come to those realizations on your own time. And so that's actually part of what inspired this series. So this is the first webinar of a series of weekly webinars that we want to do, where we're actually now educating you about what some of these templates are. You don't have to get the app, you don't have to use it. We would love it if you did support us, of course. But you can use your own journal, or if you use your phone notes app or something like that, you can use that as well. But we're going to be going into some of the psychological kind of principles and ideas behind these templates. So that's on the client front. If you're joining us today as a therapist, you can use this as a therapist as well. And really the value that we want to offer therapists with this app is through the ability to actually, to make it a journal for therapists as well. And that's through the form of private psychotherapy notes. And so if you're a clinician, you know that, we have to take progress notes, which are part of our client's medical record, and that's kind of documenting the main themes of what's being covered in therapy. But as a clinician, you're also able to have private psychotherapy notes, which are independent of a client's medical record. And these are more of your own reflections and you processing what's going on with your clients personally. And so we're creating an app where you can in this app, store private psychotherapy notes yourself. These can be things like general reflections after a session. You could use it for session planning. If you know that you have, a particular case that requires a little more thought and planning, you could actually just jot down your ideas here. You could organize goals and themes, as therapy is going on. you know that, hey, we covered something really important. I want to make sure we come back and revisit this. And so it's nice to have a running list of important themes there. And you can also use it to process your own feelings regarding any cases. So if any cases are bringing up any kind of countertransference issues or anything like that, you can use it as a personal place to do that, as well as take just general administrative notes as well. Apart from making it your own journal in a way, you can also assign relevant journaling templates to your clients. So as you get familiar with the different types of prompts and you realize, hey, my client can really benefit from this, you can share that with them as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit about what Therapy Journal is. Now, as for today's webinar, what we want to cover is just a few different issues or topics. One is we want to talk about how to use journaling most effectively. And then, every week when we do these webinars, we want to address one issue that, or not one, a few issues that journaling can help with. And for this week, we're going to talk about emotions in general. We're going to talk about boundaries in general as well. And then we're going to talk about goal setting and motivation. And there's going to be a little bit of time I'm going to leave for you guys to actually practice journaling during the webinar itself. Unfortunately, because it's a webinar, this is it's a rookie mistake, but we're not going to be able to have much of a discussion, or unfortunately, the Q&A portion in the same kind of way. You guys can still ask questions through the Q&A and I'll answer them here. Just won't be as maybe interactive as we would have hoped. Okay, so on that note, let's jump in. Here we go. So journaling and therapy. I just wanted to kind of draw the parallels between therapy and journaling and see how they're similar as well as how they're a little bit different. And so on one level, I like to think of therapy as an art of compassion and curiosity. Compassion in the sense of when you're able to show understanding towards another person, as well as empathy. However, you're not able to really build understanding unless you have curiosity to try to understand what's going on for this person. And so, through the process of therapy, you're being asked thoughtful questions, right, to understand the things that will ultimately make your life better and more complete. And in a similar way, journaling is a private medium for you to have that same kind of inquisitiveness and curiosity into yourself as well, right? So it's you putting words into the things that are meaningful to you, but in writing rather than out loud. And so I think there's a value that comes with journaling that parallels a lot of what clients experience in therapy itself. Now, where it's a little bit different, or where there's some challenges when it comes to open journaling, is that we're not being guided by a perspective outside of our own when we're journaling, right? And this can become difficult because when we're the ones experiencing the pains or the sufferings of our own problems or situations, it's hard for us to detach enough from that suffering to see the forest for the trees, right? To be able to see a path out and to recognize the steps that have to be taken. And open journaling can be helpful, right? Where you're just generally kind of freely writing about what's on your mind and what's going on. But some studies and anecdotal case studies have shown that it's often created more problems or more distress for people when they do that than actually leading to relief and benefit. And that's because, if we can easily get lost in that pain as we're journaling. There's an author, her name is Kay Adams. She's also the founder of the Therapeutic Journaling Institute. And so what she's developed is something called the Journal Ladder, which starts out by taking you from more structured journaling into ultimately the highest level, which is free writing. And so what makes the therapists so valuable is that they act as guides in the journey to better understand yourself, whereas open journaling might not really enable you to do that as much. Okay, so that's kind of what led to, a part of the value that we're trying to create in Therapy Journal, which is using structured prompts to understand yourself better. And so we're going to use some of the prompts that we have to guide the discussion today. And again, if you have your own journal or you have something that you want to journal with, please have that handy and we'll take it from there. Okay, Now, just give me 1 second. I'm going to share the prompts that I have. One second. And as we're going along, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put it into the Q&A box. Okay, great. So I'm just sharing my screen of the Therapy Journal app. This is where I took my notes for the talk today, so you guys can actually see the app while I go over some of my talks. So for today, the topic that I wanted to cover is how to kind of like an introduction to some of the bigger themes that you can use journaling for. And so for today, we want to talk about emotions, boundaries, as well as goal setting and motivation. And so I'm going to walk us through a little bit of education first, and then we're going to go into the actual journaling guidelines and prompts themselves. Okay, so first up is on emotions. So journaling can be an excellent tool for developing what's known as an internal locus of control. An internal locus of control is when we are able to manage our emotions and our internal and our state through an internal process, as opposed to an external locus of control, right? Which is when we try to control things outside of ourselves to make ourselves feel better. And so ideally, you want to be able to take care of yourself without depending on another person to change their actions or their behaviors, or for your circumstances to have to change, because a lot of times things are beyond our control. And so when we can't necessarily change our situations, how do we actually help ourselves to feel better? Okay, so, and on this point as well, right, we talked about journaling being a way of developing compassion, right? And so we can have compassion for others as well as compassion for ourselves. And so having compassion for another person requires being able to understand them. And when you're not able to understand another person, then that quickly leads to judgment, right? It leads to more of a negative assessment of that person. And so likewise, we want to be able to have understanding of ourselves, because if we can't truly understand ourselves, then we're going to have that same kind of critical voice or critical stance towards ourselves as well. But if you can have understanding, then you can have compassion. And the more, this is another kind of a side point, the more self-understanding you can have and the more self-compassion you can have, the more you're going to be able to empathize and understand other people as well, and ultimately have more compassion for them. And when people aren't able to have compassion for others, that's when they resort to judgment and trying to manipulate or control them. So anyways, so journaling is a nice way to explore yourself. And a good starting point for that really is emotions. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. So to really understand yourself and to develop that internal locus of control, we first have to develop a sense of self, which is independent of our feelings. So in talking about this, I like to talk about some of the principles in a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, in which he talks about who are you really at your core. And he says that a lot of times, if you ask a person, who are you, or if you really reflect on it, you might get to the conclusion that I'm my thoughts. But if you actually were to think about that, right? Let's imagine you took your thoughts out of your mind and you put them into a person, and your thoughts were an actual person. What would you think about this person, right? You probably think this person, one, won't stop talking. He's judgmental, he's indecisive, he's scattered, and you'd probably get annoyed of this person very quickly. And so he basically leads you down this path of recognizing that you're not the thoughts themselves, but who you are at the core is the person that sits behind the thoughts. And you're the one that's listening to your thoughts as you're thinking. And so in this way, right, and you can practice this by even just in your mind saying something like, hello, hello, this is me, I'm thinking and I'm listening to my own thoughts, right? It's a line that I sometimes say to myself to reground myself. But recognize that you're the one that's listening to the thoughts, not necessarily the thoughts themselves. And so in this way, right, you are the subject and the thoughts are the object. And you are always the one that's listening and experiencing the object, but you're not the object itself. And so this is the relationship that a person has quite literally with everything in the universe around them, that you at the core are your consciousness and you're the observer, and you're experiencing all the different sensations that your body allows you to experience. So that means your five senses, right? So the things that you see, right? You're looking at me right now, and you know that I'm not you, but you're the one that's perceiving me. And so you're the subject. This includes what you hear. So just like your thoughts are distinct from yourself, my voice is also distinct, right? So you know that me speaking isn't you. And so you can have that separation. And so it includes all the five senses, right? So vision, sound, smell, taste, and touch, right? All of these things, you're the one that's experiencing it. And so this also extrapolates to your thoughts, and it also extends to your feelings as well, that ultimately you're the one that's experiencing the emotion itself, but you are not that emotion. So it's not that you are angry, right? You're not the anger itself. You're feeling the anger, right? You feel angry. And so that's the difference between the you and the emotion. And so when you can recognize that you're distinct from the emotion, you can get a little bit of space from it, where you recognize that who I am is a separate entity from the emotion that I'm experiencing. You're always the observer, right? And the one that experiences, not the experience itself. And so the very first step that you want to do when it comes to emotions is just to be able to identify, what is it that I'm feeling right now? And we're feeling emotions at every single moment of the day, right? Maybe you're feeling excited, maybe you're feeling bored, maybe you're feeling sleepy, right? Sleepy is a little more of a sensation than a feeling, but we could combine it together for today's sake, right? But there's always something that you're experiencing in the moment. Maybe you're curious, right? Curiosity is an emotion, and you're experiencing the curiosity, right? Maybe you're feeling judgmental. Maybe you're feeling anxious. Whatever it is, at every given moment of the day, you're probably feeling at least a couple emotions that you can identify. And so that's the place you want to start first. Just label whatever it is that you're feeling. And you're going to see this when we get to the prompts, but that's the very first step. When you can label it and identify it, that already helps to soothe and regulate your emotional state instantly just by doing that. But we also don't want to just stop there, right? There's more to emotions than just what the emotion feels like. And that's that emotions reflect our values, right? So emotions carry meaning behind them, and that we feel an emotion in response to something that is important to us. And if something wasn't important to us, or if it didn't carry any kind of significant meaning, then we wouldn't feel anything, right? If I see like I have a charger on my desk, okay, there's a charger on my desk, nothing that relevant. If I look at my computer and I see that I have 6% charge left, I'm going to feel anxious because it's important that this webinar keeps running and that it doesn't get cut off short, right? So we're going to feel an emotion anytime that there's something that we value. So the next step after you identify what the feeling is you want to understand, why am I feeling it, right? What is this emotion reflecting that's important to me, whether positive or negative? So that goes to number 2. So first we had the what, and now we have the why. Now, for many people, right, unfortunately, this is where they stop. Just to recognize what an emotion is and why they feel it. But there's another layer to emotions that a lot of times people aren't aware of, which is that emotions actually have a purpose. And the Latin word for emotion, right? It comes from a Latin word which means the word emotion. Sorry, it comes from a Latin word which means to move, and that's because the purpose of an emotion is to compel us towards a goal or objective, right? They're there to motivate us. We experience emotions in one of the most kind of early parts of our brain, the most primitive parts of our brain. And it's because emotions are there to drive us, right, towards something or away from something, and to fulfill some kind of a goal or objective. And that's really what we need to figure out when it comes to emotions. We need to uncover exactly what it is that this emotion is telling me to do, right? What is it wanting from me or needing from me? And that's the last part, which is the need. And so a lot of times people will get stuck in negative emotions because they're not able to uncover what the kind of corresponding need to this emotion is. And it's really an art and a place to explore, a very rich thing to explore, to understand more about. And different emotions have different functions. One example I like to use often is the difference between guilt and regret, right? That when we're feeling guilty, right, it's usually signaling that we violated some value that's important to us. And so that's why we feel guilt. Now, the purpose of guilt is usually to realign us with our values. And so that means to, make atonements, right? If there's anyone that we've harmed or anyone that we betrayed. It's also to make a commitment, right? That I'm not going to do this again. And then atonement, commitment, and then usually at some point there's a place of it coming to an acceptance and forgiveness, right? So maybe finding forgiveness either from yourself or from someone else. Now compare this to regret, right? Regret doesn't mean the same thing as guilt does, right? Guilt means that we've intentionally broken a code that we knew we shouldn't have done. Regret is saying that knowing what I know today, I know that I wish that I had done something differently in the past. But it's not that I necessarily did something bad that I knew I shouldn't have been doing. Maybe I just didn't have all the information. And so what regret needs usually is to learn any lessons that could have been learned from this, if there's anything I can take from it, as well as to come to a place of acceptance with the circumstances. And so, regret needs acceptance. Guilt needs atonement. And so likewise, things that are usually any emotions that fall under anxiety, right? Anxiety is anticipating some kind of a feared outcome. And so you want to prepare for that, right? Your anxiety isn't there just to wreak havoc in your day and make you feel terrible. It's there saying, hey, there's something bad that could happen if I'm not careful or if I don't plan accordingly. So what it needs me to do is to take preemptive measures, right? What can I do to mitigate my risk so that this doesn't happen? Grief and loss, right? That's grief represents a loss of value, there's something that meant something to me and I don't have it anymore. It could be a person, at most extremes, right? You lose a loved one. You could also lose a hope or a dream, right? Something that you wished to have gotten. Maybe you're applying for jobs and you were going through the interview process and you were really excited. You were seeing this vision that I'm going to be working at this company. And then all of a sudden you hear back that you got rejected, right? Now you're grieving the loss of that vision, the loss of what could have been. And so it's very easy to get stuck in that place of grief because it hurts, it's painful. But what grief ultimately is needing is it's needing for you to create new meaning in your life, right? Suddenly when you've lost this thing, there's a vacuum, there's a void, and you feel that void. And so, gradually and with time, when you're ready for it, it needs to be replaced with new meaning that can give you a sense of meaning and fulfillment. And so just in this way, right, the more nuanced you can understand the variety of emotions that we can feel, the more you'll be able to really learn the art of finding the depth of what it is that you need to grow. And usually every emotion has some kind of a lesson that it's trying to teach you. Okay, so I know I've been talking a lot. Thank you for following along. If you have any questions about feelings or emotions, please drop them in the Q&A box. I would love to answer them. But if not, I'm going to start to shift us over to the first journaling prompt. Okay, so the prompts that we're going to cover today are in the course library. Also, if you want to download this app, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, you can go to therapyjournal.app.app, and you can just put it in the chat box, and there should be a link there. Unfortunately, we're only on iOS right now. We're still working to build out Android. But if you do have an iPhone, go ahead and you can go ahead and download the app here. I don't know how to make it into a hyperlink. There we go. So yeah, you can click on that link and download the app if you like. For today, we're going to be going through the prompts in the Preparing for Therapy folder. So the very first one is on feeling. So we just spent the last, I don't know, I feel like 15 minutes talking about emotions. Now we're going to do this prompt, which is quite simple, but it goes through the 3 principles that we talked about. And for me, just on a personal anecdote is that this is something that I, at one point, I would do this every single day. Lately, I haven't been doing this quite as much, but I can say that the days that I was doing this every day, I definitely had a more, I was more grounded, more in control of myself. And I believe I had a higher kind of elevated state of consciousness as I felt more and more connected with myself. So in this prompt, you can see it's just 3 simple stems. And the first one says, I'm feeling. And then you have A, B, C, right? So you can go beyond that, where you want to just sit and write down every emotion that you can recognize that you're feeling. You might want to reflect on your current circumstances or situation and see what comes up. And then 2, you want to say, I'm feeling this way because, right? So now this is where you're going to identify the why. And so with each corresponding letter, identify why you believe you're feeling that. What does that feeling represent to you? What is the value that it represents? And the last prompt is, this feeling is telling me that I am needing. And this is now where you try to identify what you need. And a good starting place when it comes to the last one is try to think of the opposite feeling, right? Let's say you're feeling confused, right? I'm feeling confused because I have this assignment to do. I guess school's almost over, or over for most people, but I have this task I have to get done and I don't know how to do it. So I'm feeling confused. What am I needing? So try to think of the opposite of confusion, right? I'm needing clarity, right? Maybe a sense of direction. And so you could start there with the opposite word, the opposite emotion, and then think of what is it that would lead me to get to this state. Maybe I'm needing clarity, and that's by doing research into X, Y, and Z. And so in this way, when you can identify what the need of your emotions are, you can help to alleviate them. And until you do that, your emotion likely is not going to go away. You can try to block it out and force it away, but whatever that emotion or that part of you is trying to get you to understand is going to keep on knocking. And at its most extremes, when people keep pushing these things away for a long time, at some point, these emotions start banging and it gets very hard to ignore and it can cause a lot of distress. So anyways, on that note, you guys can go ahead and take about 5 minutes. It's 1:37 on my end. Let's just go to 1:42, and then I'll start shifting into the next topic. Okay. I will turn my camera back on in 5 minutes. Okay.